Hello YouTube, back for another video, this time another When You Pull. Please remember to like and subscribe for future content and help the channel grow. And without any further ado, let's get into it. So, this is When You Pull. With FR and Shinryu, things work a little differently than they have in the past, so I want to give my thoughts and go over things you might want to know before making your choices on these banners, whether pulling or otherwise. This is not a should you pull or similar, because I don't believe that it's the best format for what I'm aiming for. My goal is to try and use my experience to help people make more informed decisions for themselves, rather than simply parroting what they've read or seen online. Improving the discourse around fights and characters is always going to be good for the health of the game, and I often see folks say things like, I heard that X character is bad and falls off quickly, or that you have to pull for Y because they're meta and you can't beat content without them, which doesn't have any basis in fact, nor does it have any kind of personal opinion behind it that they're arguing for. And frankly, the game doesn't really function like that in Shinryu. I understand that a lot of people want to take the path of least resistance, and that not everyone wants to do a ton of research for fights and future viabilities of characters. And that's totally fine. But for those that are interested, I'm hoping to help people learn better habits when it comes to deciding whether or not to pull that are based more on fact or personal taste than on hearsay. With that being said, these are my thoughts, and as I want to encourage dialogue with the community, please leave a comment down below with what you think and what your plans are. So, for the first banner that we'll be covering, we've got Penelo, Kain, and Warrior of Light. Penelo's rework here can be summed up as both skills get more uses, and the Braven HP attacks they give you hit harder. Seriously, it's that simple. Her Brave attacks do more Brave hits, and the HP attacks do more HP attacks, clocking in at a reasonably competitive 3. Well, competitive for support at least. They've got the usual refunds in between attacks, and they increase Penelo's recast gauge. Not really anything groundbreaking here. She does get to start with her LD overhead, which is nice, and the LD itself hits harder with, you guessed it, 3 HP attacks. The effect itself also gives party HP damage up, which is nice, but kind of standard at this point. Her C65 now lasts a whopping 13 turns, and has party brave gains attached, but given the nature of how Penelo plays, you'll probably burn through those turns fairly quickly. As for her EX, it now hits 5 times, and the passive for it gives either brave damage or gains, depending on which stance Penelo is in. I think it's brave damage for skill 1 and gains for skill 2. She does have a nice party HP cap of 20% up on her high armor when you max it out. So she does have a pretty solid function in the party, and is one of the first gauge chargers that you're likely to use for Shinryu. Her damage output does remain fairly average, so you're not likely to want to give her a lot of turns during force time. However, if you do, note that she will work well with bonus conditions that look for the party being buffed or having a certain number of buffs, stacks of buffs, or like overhead effects, party battery, healing, instant turn rate, the use of Brave War HP commands. She can also cleanse, but I don't think we've seen that up to this point on JP as like an FR condition. So her likely partners will be including, Hope, Yuna, Aerith, Charlotta, maybe Machina, Lunafreya, Lead. Honestly, she can pair just fine with a lot of FRs, especially the kind of generalist ones, like Aroha or Lilithette. Overall, she's a perfectly fine unit, but a lot of people will probably ignore her for Garnet, at least, at first. Being the first rapid gauge charge unit is definitely appealing, but I think that a lot of players will likely find that they just don't really need that sort of thing in early Shinryu. And then by the time they're really kind of becoming interested in it, Ignis will be here to fill a number of kind of similar niches. However, disclaimer, this does assume that I'm reading the numbers correctly on Compendium. Penelo is able to add 50% to the damage bonus using Skill 1 or Skill 2 during Force Time, which is really huge early on when most of your actions are only going to add about 5 to 8%. Her primary downside is that she floods your party with buffs that she then frames, which can interfere with your party's own actions or your BT and FR setups, which will often rely on calls for buffs and things like that. She additionally, as I mentioned before, she does have that instant turn rate, which is kind of a blessing and a curse, because if you need that for an FR condition, great, but when you don't, you really don't need it, and you don't want Penelo taking a bunch of those turns. The second unit here on the banner is Kais, who I'm not really going to cover. He does gain force levels here, which is great, and he comes with a ton of useful utility, but the simple fact is that he doesn't receive any tangible upgrades here, and is thus still just okay in a world where Selfie exists. And finally, Warrior of Light finally gets his BT+. He gets a pretty standard rework here, where all of his buttons, literally all of them, do more HP attacks, so his damage increases. The only things really worth noting from his rework is that his skill 2 now has AoE lock and splash, so you're able to more effectively kind of control enemies targeting him without having to spam it. He also gets to start with his LD overhead effect, so you're not immediately going right into that. And it does gain party Brave damage up, which is pretty nice. His C65 also gets Brave gain up for the party, which kind of turns into a running theme with his BT+. Its effect now gets party HP damage up and cap up, in addition to Brave gains, along with the overflows and the Brave regen he got from the base version of his BT. So, long story short, Warrior of Light got a really nice tuning pass here. His personal damage is a lot better, but still a touch lower than you might like, ranging from 3 to 6 HP attacks per turn without any off-turn damage to take advantage of. I do think that that's not necessarily a weakness for Warrior of Light, so much as it is a strength for other units. It is a shame that he doesn't have anything like a counter, but he is already very strong, and that would probably make him pretty unbalanced. That being said, there are enough Shinryu fights where a mechanic gets around either Brave or HP damage reductions, or sometimes both, that it's worth noting. It's not to say that Warrior of Light is terrible and you shouldn't ever use him, and it's not even saying that it's every fight, it's just there's enough of them that you're going to want to be aware of that. So if you are going to use him, just be careful not to bring him into fights like that. It does kind of suck that the very first Shinryu event has exactly that, though, as it can ignore HP damage reduction. I'm not sure about Brave damage reduction. And it also has a pretty hefty HP poison that he can't reduce and isn't great at healing through. However, he does have a lot to bring to the table, like a really fat 35% HP damage cap up for the party, assuming that his BT effect is up and he's blued. As for FR partners, his kit does contain both melee and range damage, primarily the latter, along with party buffing, keeping large numbers of buffs on the party, and overhead effect, healing, Brave regen,
and he can also debuff enemies, so he will be able to take advantage of FRs that want you to abuse these particular effects. As a character and within FR comps, he's really flexible, so it's not hard to slot him in with a whole bunch of different FRs. Early Shinryu examples include Kain, Braska, Gabron, and Lunafreya, all of which he works with for different reasons. And that's not including some of your more generalist FRs. Do be aware, though, that he does have a speed up effect from his EX, along with high turn rate on his skills, so you may find that he's a little more prone to cutting in during force time when you don't necessarily want him to. Also, since all of his buttons do damage to enemies, he's not going to be an effective gauge charger unit, like I mentioned with Penelo earlier. This isn't a scarlet letter or anything like that, it's just something to keep in mind.
And that's it. Those are my thoughts on the upcoming units. Drop a comment and let me know what you think of the format, and if you're pulling here, and if you're not too. Like and subscribe for more content, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.